Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a long time, but I'm Atano Circus, and I'm back for another episode of Welcome to Little War Game. In response to some community feedback that I got, and with the special help of Yummy Blah Blah, who's currently one of the best players in the game, as we're now in patch version 3.31, we're going to go over a question that myself, Xiao, another mod, and several other people see, which is when a new player, regardless of their skill, comes into the game, they ask a very simple question. What is the best build? What is something that I should be doing or striving for? And rather than give what a best build is, I think that question actually has a lot of problems with it because it assumes a great deal about the player and about the game and its current state of balance. So rather than give specifics, we're going to go through a quick video highlighting what I believe the 4 tiers of player skill are and what you should be looking for once you've identified where you are in that level, so that you can understand what players of certain skill levels should be looking for in their units and in their builds. So what better place to start with than the new player? I'm even going to call them a newer player. My main piece of advice to them is twofold. The first is that the new player needs units that have high hit points, do reasonable damage, and are effective without being looked at. For more experienced players, this is known as babysitting, but if you don't give any particular attention to the unit, it will still be effective inside of its current role. So, for example, if it requires less APM or less actions per minute, then it doesn't stress that player's multitasking. I also encourage a newer player, what kinds of builds should they be doing? Well, we talked about the units, but for a build, newer players should be looking to be aggressive. This does a couple of things. When you are aggressive, when you are attacking your opponent, use builds that emphasize I must attack my opponent. It breaks a defensive mentality. Sometimes I have watched games where actually nothing happens for about 10 minutes, and although it's between newer players, there's a sense of hesitancy to go out and actually attack and take the chance of doing damage. When you rush, you break that mentality and understand that this is a game where someone ultimately wins by attacking. It encourages, again, aggression, and it requires less knowledge. If you're defending with builds that require specific timings, there are very large windows where you must defend in very difficult ways that stress your micro, your individual unit control, and your macro, your ability to understand what's going on in the game and just make more of more. And multitasking, if you're not that fast, your resources are going to be stressed. So when you are the assaulter, when you are the person who is on the assault, on the attack, you are being aggressive. You don't require as much knowledge to execute the attack as you do to defend against it. This also helps to give you some sense of game knowledge, helps you understand what the basic units are, some other builds that people are doing, and allows you to perfect one opening over and over and over, and that can help you transition into being the next level of player that we're going to talk about. Now, we're going to go into the next one. So let's say you're not a newer player. You know roughly what counters what. You have some amount of speed, some amount of micro unit control, some amount of building things. These players I'm going to call Masters of None. I call them Div 3, but rather than get confused into what Div, the order right now is newer players and then Master of None. So these players have nothing on the level of what I'm going to call an optimizing player, who's the top, in my mind, the top level of a player. They literally have nothing that is on that level of skill or awareness or ability, and they don't have any kind of spark that allows them to force their will into a game through something that, okay, I'm playing this guy and he's bad at all these things, but this thing is so scary that everyone must take it seriously. Now, what's interesting is that because they don't have anything like that, Division 3 players, or what I've called Masters of None, are people that have, out of all players, the widest variety in terms of their builds. So maybe they're not looking for units like the newer player that have high hit points and do decent damage. Maybe they're looking for units that suit their particular way of playing. Maybe they don't feel like playing with that unit. In terms of builds, they can do everything from the safest, most secure, almost passive style, to being very aggressive, to playing a very long, drawn-out game and having a game plan. The Master of None has the widest variety in terms of the units, as a player set, the widest variety in terms of the units that they tend to use, and in the builds that they tend to use. But what's important to note is that while they may have individual strengths as players, not any one of those strengths is so serious that they abandoned their other weaknesses for that strength, or they can rely on that strength. And that's an essential difference that we're going to talk about when we go to my next person in this tier. Ooh, nice towers. Good space control. Hopefully he builds the castles up there. And the next thing I want to talk about is, remember, we had newer players, and then we had the Master of None. Now, the next group I'm going to call the One Trick. And the emphasis sounds like it's going to be one trick pony, but that's not a derogative at all. So the One Trick, these people have something about their game that's on the level of an optimizing or an optimizer player. They have something that is so insanely powerful that if every other part of their game was like this, that's it. They'd be one of the absolute best in the game, in the history of the game. You know when you're playing against this guy, okay, this guy, he plays the way that the game should be played, or I understand the way the game should be played. But if he does this, he has this ability to like break the rules of the game. So an example of some things that would you could excel at. There's so many things in a real-time strategy game, but your worker micro, your individual unit engagements, maybe your macro, maybe your ability to expand at the perfect time, and it'll look so risky, but you always do it at a safe time, and it's just very clear and easily defended. Maybe your SimCity is glorious. You can place buildings in such a way that you can hold off an entire army with 5 units because you have like sick, amazing SimCity. Maybe your upgrades are at a perfect time and you always know the right moment to hit your opponent. Maybe your scouting is amazing. You always know what your opponent is doing. And yeah, he's better than you, but you always know what he's doing before he does. So you have the ability to make things even when they shouldn't be. You can guess in the dark better than anyone else. The One Trick has at least one, at most 2 of these capabilities. That's all they've got. So, well, when I say that's all they've got, it's important to note that the One Trick actually has a nice Great Wall of China over there. What's important to note is that the One Trick has a very limiting fact, and it is that, as I said, they have 1, maybe 2 aspects of their play that are on the level of an optimizing player. But because they know that and they know what their strength is, they emphasize that strength ridiculously. So they only play builds that emphasize that capability. So for a recent, actually no, I'm going to get into player examples later. I'm actually going to append another write-up to indicate what builds in the current state of the game fit each one of these categories. But that's not essential to the quick and get to it point of this video. The 4th type of player we're going to talk about is the one I've already alluded to, which is the optimizer. So thanks again to Yummy Blah Blah. I'm not at this level, so I needed some insight from someone who was to help understand it. So what I got from him is that the optimizing player is someone who looks for edges. Yeah, the One Trick has, it's kind of like the One Trick has a sword, and that sword is a finely sheared, like finely expressed and brightened and sharpened point, and you know if that sword comes down, it just has to wreck whatever it just touches. It's just gonna fall apart. But the optimizing player has like an armory in their back. They don't have a sword. They have swords and scimitars and bows and arrows and a nuclear weapon. Like, they have every single aspect of their game, while not perfect, is on the level that you cannot define one thing and say, I must respect this or I will die. You must respect the entirety and the completeness of their play. So, things that you look for as an optimal player. For units, there's a concept called the skill floor, which is these are units that have the absolute lowest level of requirements to be useful. So if you're paying attention to them or you're not paying attention to them, they have a certain level of use. The antithesis of that is the skill ceiling. The skill ceiling represents, all right, if I am amazing, this is the maximum use I can get out of this unit. And that's where the optimizing player thrives. Any unit that a normal player can make 1 times as effective, that they can make 4 or 5 or 10 times as effective, they want. If a unit is fast, it has abilities, if it has regeneration, if it's something that can act in a multitude of ways and can be used as a multi-purpose tool, but only if you're fast enough and you can keep on top of everything, those are the kinds of units that the optimizer looks for as dragons are coming up here and just raiding all the things. The optimizing player looks for builds that are much the same way. They look to cut corners. They will make as few offensive units as possible and be as economically greedy, or conversely, as absolutely pinpoint accurate in their perfect assaults as possible. If there is a way to shear off 3 seconds on their build, they will find it. If there is a way that they can, I can survive with 3 units instead of 6 because that lets me get this faster, then they'll do it. These are the characteristics of an optimizer, and as such, their skills are so high that only builds that allow them the most expression will work for them. You won't see them play something that depends on a really passive style where my opponent comes to me and we just kind of figure it out. No. The optimizing player, even if it looks like he's playing like that, actually has a build that enables him to be at the finest honed edge of his build, of his momentum moving forward. So we talked about those 4 players. We talked about the types of units they use and the types of builds that they use. So what, in my experience and insight from kudos again, yummy, blah, blah, do we need to separate these players from each other? Well, the newer player is separated from his next tier, which is the Master of None, by just games played. Essentially, if you are a newer player and you have one strategy and you play enough of that strategy despite not knowing much about the game, even if on its face it doesn't seem like a good strategy or objectively no optimizing player would ever use this strategy, it teaches you something about the game, teaches you knowledge, allows you to get faster, helps you focus on your micro, gives you a mentality for the flow of the game, the need for scouting, etc. So essentially, the difference between a newer player and a Master of None is a degree of scale. It's a noticeable degree in scale, and you'll notice it when you see it. So now this is the one that was controversial, but is actually, I think, accurate. So let's pretend you're a Master of None, the second from the bottom. If you want to become the one trick, what makes you get to that level? You can argue, I don't think that it really can be argued, actually, that you can go from being Master of None to the Optimizer by fixing your flaws. Now, what I mean by that is this. In general, fixing your flaws will make you a more rounded player. But the one trick as a player type has something they can do that breaks the rules of how the game should be worked. If you just try and fix your flaws so that they're okay, not exemplary, but okay, the problem with that is that you just fixed something that was a weakness and made it okay. You don't have any force upon the game. You've just removed a weakness from you in the game, which is a very important distinction. So I think what separates Master of None from the one trick is just the trick. You need to have something about the way that you play that makes you indisputably superior in at least one aspect of the game, because that will allow you to find builds that suit your play style or your strengths. Now again, I don't know this from personal experience, so I consulted some awesome people. So when we're getting to the optimizing player, how does the one trick become an optimizing player? The one trick, on a scale of 1 to 10, the one trick has maybe some 5s and 6s, but this thing is a 9. Maybe they even have 6 or 7s, but they have something that's a 9, or possibly even a 10. You must respect it. It will destroy you if you don't. You need to take it into account. The optimizer, due to the way they cut corners and their skill, is a rounded 8 or 9 out of 10 in everything, and then they still have a playstyle and their unique strengths that makes something a 10 out of 10 or even an 11 out of 10. Again, they're like, it's a matter of scale and of the general skill. If you have a weakness in your game, if you have a one trick, the difference between you and an optimizing player is that the optimizing player has that you have as your strength, and even if it's his weakest part of his game, that's something that he possesses or she possesses in their arsenal at the same level that you do in your this is the thing I focus on. So again, we talked about what the player types are, the 4 of them. Keep in mind, we go from, I think this is actually a logical progression, from newer player to master of none to the one trick to an optimizing player. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what units are or what builds are. I'm going to consult some other people, and then I will append not a video response, but perhaps a response on the Little Wargame forums to explain my thoughts on this further. But I think that that's an important distinction, so the next time you're playing Little Wargame and you think to ask, or someone tells you this is the build you should do, you should consider which one of these 4 player types you're in, and then objectively consider what things you are good at and not good at, and then try and improve from there. As dragons destroy all the things, and it looks like GG. Perfect timing. Alright guys, that's it for now, and I'll catch you guys again.